Religious liberty. What do you think is the biggest threat to religious liberty in this country today?
Well, it's so multifaceted, but the biggest threat is well, for Adventists or for the country as a whole?
For the country as a whole.
For the country as a whole, I think the biggest threat, or the growing threat, is the emergencies that are upon us, which are many, financial, natural disasters, political collapse, and so on, are clearly going to create a swing toward a moralistic renewal, and even with religious overtones. And I think many Seventh Adventists and many people in religious entities are going to be easily attracted and tempted to become part of it. And if history is any guide, and prophecy is very particular, it's going to be subverted into a coercive religious environment. And the Seventh-day Adventists, I think, are very vulnerable to this, because our theology runs dangerously close to the American exceptionalism of the Christian right.
Define that.
Well, Ellen White's quite specific on the role that the United States has played in protecting freedom.
Yes.
And you've really got to watch her words, because superficially it parallels very closely this American exceptionalism. But the way I could best explain it in a short way is that God has sheltered many people and blessed them individually as they've stood up for religious freedom and left persecution and come to this country, but not, as George Bush said once, rather fatuously, he said, God has blessed America, but he couldn't have blessed more deserving people. The United States is not inherently deserving. Seventh-day Adventists are not inherently deserving. God endorses those who obey him and respond to his commands.
Amen. Listen to
and are spiritually enlightened, of course, that are renewed in their mind.
Listen to this from Robert Bork. You may be familiar with it. He, of course, was the Supreme Court nominee, Reagan's nominee. He was rejected.
He was borked. Yeah, that's a term that's
a term that has arisen, yes. He said this in his book, The Tempting of America. The forces that would break law to a tame instrument of a particular political thrust are past midway in a long march through our institutions. They have overrun a number of law schools, including a large majority of America's most prestigious, where the lawyers and judges of the future are being trained. They have an increasing voice in our politics and in Congress. But the focus of the struggle, the commanding height sought to be taken, as indeed it partially has been, is control of the courts and the Constitution. The Constitution, or the law we call constitutional, they are by no means identical, is the highest prize, and control of the selection of judges is the last step on the path to that prize. Why? Because the Constitution is the trump card in American politics, and judges decide what the Constitution means. When the Supreme Court invokes the Constitution, whether legitimately or not, as to that issue, the democratic process is at an end. Today, incredibly, we have 6 out of the 9 justices on the Supreme Court being Roman Catholic.
And we need to make it very plain that's not constitutionally wrong.
Precisely.
The Constitution itself says no religious test for public office.
That's correct.
But for Seventh-day Adventists, it should be a great wake-up call and a litmus test for what's really happening in a once Protestant society. It's shifted.
Thank you. The term hate speech, we'll come back to that, by the way. When did that come about, to the best of your knowledge? It's not something that existed in the 19th century. Well, who coined the phrase?
I don't know, but it was about 9 or 10 years ago that the first, I believe, the first hate crimes legislative proposal came up in Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And I better not name names, but it came from Texas.
Okay.
And I objected to it then, big time, and I'm not saying I'm the only one that knows, but it was my job as Liberty editor, and I objected to it, and I ran some articles. And it's only recently that most of our religious liberty directors have seen where it's heading, but from the beginning I thought...
Where is it heading?
Well, it's heading to restrict religious speech. It's heading to restrict this sort of stuff directly.
Yes.
And I'm not just projecting now. I'm only making it a larger thing. Already it's being said that any religious talk that speaks ill or shows errors in another religion or even most simply offends another religious person, even if you're speaking calmly and accurately, if they're offended, that can be said as hate speech.
And we have now a Supreme Court of which 6 are Roman Catholic.
Now, one thing,
defining hate speech.
As you're reading Bork's comments, you realize that what we object to is precisely the opposite of what he was saying. He's of the faction that wants those 6 there. He would be very comfortable now with the majority opinion of the Supreme Court.
You don't think he could be objective at all?
Well, yes. He
wrote me, by the way.
That's an interesting comment, because I do not believe the Supreme Court is the primary problem in US government at the moment. Mm-hmm. But they're set up to endorse the wrong things. I believe, as they're presently set up, they would endorse and confirm a Sunday law, for example.
Okay.
But they're not likely the ones, in fact, they're certainly not, according to great controversy, the ones that will initiate it.
Yes.
Ellen White says that it's a clamour to the legislature, mm-hmm. and to gain favour, mm-hmm. they will pass it. But in better times, a Supreme Court that understood religious freedom and the Constitution and was not biased toward a certain viewpoint might say this is wrong. But now I'm sure they would take it.
Are you saying that, you say you see where this whole hate speech legislation is headed. Sure. Are you saying that books like Great Controversy are in jeopardy?
Yes. Oh, I think its days are numbered as far as open distribution. I'm sure of it.
Would you say that again? I mean, look at, you're talking to the...
I believe that it's a very short time that this can be easily distributed. None of us know the time, but I think very few years at most.
I feel that too. And that's one of the reasons I'm trying again. I ought to tell you, I don't live in a pleasant home. My wife is burnt out. She's seen me on this mission. Yeah. Living hand to mouth, not knowing where some basic things are coming from, and yet determined by God's grace to bring this book before the public while it is still legally permissible to do so. When I say it's not a pleasant place, she deserves her weight in gold because she has tolerated this piece of clay.
Well, you have it the same as my wife. She says, why are you away all the time? Why do you have to travel? Why do you have to speak? And my father had the same tension. My mother was very kind about it, but we're torn between things that we feel we have to do for our own private life and where do you step out? Where do you pick up the challenge? But we have to. I don't think there's much time. It's not given to us to know when Christ's coming. Ellen White's very plain on that. No time prophecy. But I don't think it's a hard call projecting on what's happening now, as I just say, to say that the days that we can clearly operate are very short. And I'll give you an example from Australia, which is a very free country. I make no case that Australia is a repressive country, and the Constitution was modelled after the US. But just recently, an evangelist in a series, not an Adventist evangelist, had some Bible texts and some Quranic texts on the screen. A Muslim in the audience challenged him. They got into an altercation, went to court, and he was convicted and given about 2 years prison, and thankfully after a few months or weeks in jail he was released, but they didn't reverse the sentence. And the judge said this: didn't matter whether his comments and quotes were correct. The important thing is offence was taken, and he's legally liable for that. So that's where we're headed, and even worse things, I think.
Tell me about Canada. How far has it gone in Canada?
Canada's the same. It's just that they haven't had a case like that. But a judge recently gave his legal opinion that to distribute Bible texts without comment or to speak them without comment, on homosexuality, is a criminal offence. You'll be put in jail for it.